We're now live, Chair.
Thank you, Kirsty. Right, okay, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Adult Health and Social Care Scrutiny Board. This is a special agenda calling from a cabinet decision taken fairly recently. So it's a one-item agenda in relation to A board. So if we go through the agenda, we have substitutes nominated for this evening. So we do have Councillor Foster for Councillor Barnes, and we equally have Councillor Evans for Councillor Parsons-Hulls. So thank you for agreeing to substitute. I'm hoping it's not going to be a lengthy meeting and we get through the business as soon as. And we welcome Councillor Scullion equally to the meeting on our special adults meeting. So welcome to the adults meeting. Item number 2, interest for members to declare their interest at the relevant time. Item number 3, admissions to the public. The public are most welcome, and we have quite a few of the public on board this evening. So welcome, and thank you for taking the time to come to this special meeting. And welcome to anyone who's watching this on YouTube. And so we'll go straight on to item number 4, which is highways policy and the use of A boards. So I'm going to call in on Councillor Hutchinson first of all to speak on the actual matter itself. If you want to raise your hand to speak, on the bottom bar there is a reactions button, and there's a hands up button on that function. And just be mindful if you can keep your sound on mute unless you're speaking and any other device, just so there's no background feedback, background noise. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say that being blind, I can't see this button, so I'm afraid I know where to mute and unmute, but I can't see any other buttons. That's
fine. I can see you anyway on screen, so I will make a note that I can see you on screen. So I will, we'll just put your hand up in the normal old-fashioned way, and I will capture you as and when. So so Councillor Hutchinson, would you like to speak on the call-in notice, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for arranging this meeting. I'd like to make a declaration of interest to begin with. I am a trustee for Halifax Society for the Blind, and I've also spent 35 years working as an eye surgeon to try and reduce the impact of visual disability on people. Most people take their sight and hearing for granted, so it's difficult. I can quite appreciate that it's difficult to put yourself in other people's position to understand the challenges that they face in their daily life. So I'm not necessarily surprised at some of the aspects of this policy which have caused me to ask for it to be reviewed. Following the pandemic, or during the pandemic, we've become very aware of the importance of confidence for people to actually access public spaces, access businesses. And we want to attract people back to the streets of our towns and our villages, and allowing them to do that with confidence is particularly important. A boards as a means of advertising deliberately obstruct the highway so that people are forced to actually look at them and see what's on them and the message that they convey. This produces difficulties for wheelchair users, people pushing prams, particularly if it's a busy pavement, but it causes particular problems if you can't actually see the obstacle in the first place. And you have to try and work out what it is, how big it is, how can you best get around it. It takes time and it can be embarrassing. If you collide with it, it can cause physical injury, but either way, it undermines people's confidence and makes them reluctant to go into these spaces that we want them to make full use of. I also think it's important that when new policies and strategies are being introduced into the council, that there's a consistency in them, that the same thread follows through each of the different policies. I mean, last Thursday, we were discussing the ambition of Calderdale to become an age-friendly community in line with the World Health Organization criteria. And there are 8 domains in that criteria, one of which is that buildings and outdoor spaces should be accessible to all, and that having narrow pavements, uneven, cracked pavements, or clutter or unnecessary clutter on the pavement gets in the way of achieving that particular domain. There's also Calderdale's all-age disabilities strategy, which states that it's important that people feel comfortable and safe wherever they go without prejudice or discrimination, and notes that social barriers are the main cause of barriers, that they include people's attitudes to disability, as well as physical and physical barriers. There's also the government's manual for the streets, which recognises the needs to keep unnecessary clutter to a minimum when designing the street space. And for many years now, we've declared our intention to be a dementia-friendly borough. Large numbers of people with dementia also have visual impairment. That's because quite a number of common eye diseases become much more frequent as you get older, whether that's glaucoma, whether that's macular degeneration, but also dementia can make it difficult to process the messages that are being sent to the brain from the eyes. And so complicated environments become much more difficult to actually navigate safely and with confidence if you're in the earlier stages of dementia. I think it's important that policies should be clear. If we're expecting people to follow those policies, they need to actually be able to easily understand what they are. And I do have concerns that the policy as currently drafted is not clear at all. And so it puts an additional burden on business owners as to what they can and they can't do in terms of their advertising strategy. And clarity is also needed if you're going to enforce policies, and policies that would require street wardens to go around with a tape measure and say in some circumstances these are allowed and in other circumstances they aren't, starts making it very, very difficult to enforce policies. A number of other boroughs have adopted a zero tolerance for A boards. I'm thinking of Bradford, I'm thinking of Leeds, I'm thinking of the city centre in York, and also North Lincolnshire. The borough of Hackney has gone down this route as well. I think it's, we need to be doing everything that we can to attract as many people as possible to make use of our public spaces. And I would really hope that this could be looked at to try and maximise that. And one final point, I do think that there's scope for reflecting on our approach as a borough to consultation and to the use of equality impact assessments. I think there is something that we might be able to learn from that. So I hope the Scrutiny Board thinks that it's worth considering these issues in a little bit more depth. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. I was equally happy to call this item into scrutiny, and we've got a number of representations from the different groups out there that would struggle with this current policy if it was introduced in its current format. I can't possibly follow on from what Councillor Hutchinson has commented, so I'm not going to even go down that route, but totally agree with his comments. And I think actually, when you look around, certainly the town I represent, Brickhouse, it's becoming more and more people. It's becoming more cluttered with people taking advantage, and equally, not just that, it's all equally distractions as well. So it's not just for the pedestrians, but equally as well for the drivers passing by as well. Taking more note of that, but certainly the user groups. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to call upon Councillor Josh Fenton Glynn, and then I'll call upon Councillor Jane Scullin, and then I'll welcome comments from other members as well, and members of the public, of course, because you're most welcome to attend this evening. So Councillor Josh Fenton Glynn, first of all, please.
Brilliant. Thank you everyone for coming along. It's really good to see so many people who are trying to do our best for here as well. So, I mean, the first thing just to say is that, this policy was brought in to try to get us closer to where I think everyone wants to be, which is not having A boards. And that's why our initial idea was to have a pilot of an A board policy where they weren't encouraged, and where, on certain streets they weren't allowed, in Hebden Royd, and then all being well to roll that out across the borough. We clearly got the balance wrong, and I'm hearing both from the strength of feelings that I've got in terms of emails, and also from this call-in, that we have got that balance wrong. We were always happy to engage constructively and see how it went, and that's why. So having this meeting, that's why we brought in the policy in the first place. I'm slightly surprised by some of Colin's language about it being a confusing policy, because we're basically going from nothing to having something, which is much better than going from having nothing to continuing to have nothing. But yeah, we've clearly got the balance wrong. And I think in that spirit, I think it's really good to have a meeting where we can actually hear from a few people about what would work better, about how we can implement this policy better. And I think, we would be very happy if it is referred back to Cabinet, to go back and to think about how we can release it. Obviously that, pushes it all back a month, which is frustrating, because we would be able to already be rolling it out in Hebden Royd now if we weren't putting it back a month. And, maybe in future it might be worth just kind of, some more informal conversations as the kind of first avenue to explore, and then we can look at it. And I imagine that this committee will be looking at this policy and how it's working once we've implemented it in whatever form we choose to, and I think that would be again a conversation that we're very keen to keep having. So the main thing I'd say is, firstly, it's good to be here. I'm glad so many people are here to feed in, and I think that's really positive, and I'm very happy to listen to those and make sure that when we do come out with a policy, and if we go back and look at it again as Cabinet, then we can get a policy which is in line with what the group that we're trying to bring in this policy for want, because we don't want to bring in a policy that doesn't have the impact that we want it to, which is making our streets easier to traverse, making our streets more inclusive and acceptable. So looking forward to hearing from lots of people, but you are pushing it an open door here.
Thank you, Councillor Fenton Glynn. That's most music to our ears, and certainly look forward to working with you as well and seeing where we can help as a board, really. I'm going to bring in Councillor Scullin as the portfolio holder, because at first when the calling came here, it was like, actually, is it the right place? But actually, yes, it is definitely the right place because of the issues that have been raised. So Councillor Scullin, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Councillor Jane Scullin, and I have got the Cabinet portfolio within the Council for Highways. And this is the first time I've attended the Adult Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee, so thank you for inviting me. The first thing to say is that I make no apologies for bringing forward to Cabinet a policy. There is currently no policy in terms of pavement access in Calderdale. There is no policy at all, and that has made it very difficult in terms of enforcing various things. There's highway legislation, of course, but that's complex. So this was our attempt to try and have something that met a number of needs and was also give us an opportunity for learning and an opportunity to understand the implications for enforcement. So make no apologies in some ways for bringing this forward. However, we did propose a pilot, a review of that pilot, and learning the lessons over a period of time. In some ways, you could say, Chair and members, if I wanted to be unkind to myself, a historic British compromise, and I'm afraid one which seemed to suit nobody really. So we tried our best, and actually I would accept that it was far from perfect. We could do better, and we can always do better. And in the period of reflection since this particular item has been called in, myself and the officers have done a great deal of thinking and further research. And we will be very interested to hear from people in terms of what we might do better. If I could just, Chair, have your indulgence just to mention one or two things. The first thing is that during the pandemic, we did in fact close off some very busy shopping streets in order to allow social distancing. And I think that was actually extremely helpful. And one of the things that we may want to visit in terms of public health, but also improving life for people with mobility impairments and visual impairments, whether that's something actually that should be in a new policy. It was extremely unpopular with motorists and with some shoppers, but I think actually it's something that we could further reflect upon. I think, and this is the benefit of hindsight and the ability to change our minds, that we are not just heartless bureaucrats who never change our minds, but actually we do reflect on the decisions that we've made. There was a focus in the paper just on A boards. And I think Councillor Hutchison put it very well earlier. Actually, we didn't really look at bollards, street furniture, the overhanging hedges issues, the alfresco cafes, of course, that have sprung up as a result of the pandemic and where the government has asked us in terms of licensing and enforcement to go easy on them. We've got a lot of street clutter, actually, and this policy doesn't actually go into the detail of the street clutter. And we've also got electric charging points, electric vehicle charging points to come in our streets. And I think the policy should perhaps take a look in terms of future-proofing some of those things. I think we are always in difficulty as a council in terms of thinking about the balance between all of the different constituents and lobbyists. And as several people have reflected, we have also tried to look at the needs of small businesses, in particular post-pandemic, really struggling in terms of their efforts, as Councillor Hutchison said, to draw attention to their businesses. And we were very conscious of that. I think the other thing that we were conscious of, and comments made already have been very helpful, actually our mechanism for consultation with different groups on highways issues is not great, and we could definitely do better on that. As Councillor Fenton Glynn said, members this evening may be pushing an open door, but if committee members decide that they do want Cabinet, this to be referred back to Cabinet, it would be very useful to have some indications from the various contributors of what kind of things really need to be in that new policy, and to give us some indications of how we might do better in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. Eloquent as ever. So thank you and welcome to our meeting. It is really useful to hear those points on board. And I think actually where we can use other organisations is like the Brick House Improvement District, for one, to actually where people needed additional help to advertise. Then we've got improvement districts around the borough, so I think it will be useful to involve those. So I'm going to bring in Councillor Kingston and then Councillor Megan Swift, and then we'll open it up to Councillor Evans. So after and Councillor Durans as well. So after I've taken the councillors, I'll open the meeting up to members who've taken the time to come to this important meeting. So Councillor Kingston, first of all, please.
Thank you very much, Howard. Chair, sorry. Just a question to either Josh or Jane, and probably Jane, just to ask, have you looked at data from some of the areas Colin referred in his speech to places that have introduced a blanket ban? Have you looked at what feedback has come to those councils where a blanket ban has been instituted? I mean, my feeling is that I can't understand why people would object to a blanket ban for something that makes a place so much more inclusive. And, you know, my sympathies are very much in the direction of a blanket ban. I'm minded to return this to Cabinet for reconsideration. I just want to understand how much research was done about how a blanket ban affects communities.
Excellent. Councillor Scullin, can I bring you back in? Do you mind if I bring you back in on these answering these points?
Not at all. Actually, I haven't immediately got that information to hand. I've got information about 29 different councils. And what it shows is that practice is tremendously varied across the country in terms of minimum pavement widths. A smaller number have done total ban, and the impact of that on businesses and on the place, as you say, of people feeling included in place, I haven't got. One of the things that's clear from the different authorities that we have looked at in terms of, you know, Wolverhampton, Bristol, Devon, Worcester, Nottinghamshire, Hereford, Liverpool, South Gloucestershire, Stockport, Surrey, Hull, Kirklees, Wakefield, Leeds, York, is that actually the practices vary so much in terms of, for example, in York, the ban is only on the historic core with the relatively narrow streets of the Shambles and so on, and the wider area, which is much more spread out and suburban, it hasn't got a total ban. So I don't know the answer to the question in terms of the impact where there has been a total ban, and that would certainly be something very useful to actually include in a future report to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scullin. I'm going to bring in Stephen Lee from Calderdale. So Stephen, would you like to say what your role is within Calderdale, just for those people that are here from the general public, please? No, I think we might have just lost Stephen Lee. I'll bring in Josh, Councillor Fenton Glynn first of all, then I'll bring you back in, Stephen Lee, if that's okay.
I was just going to add that at the start of this process, when I thought it would be happening in my ward first, and we'd be seeing it in my ward first, I did spend some time going out and speaking to local businesses owners about it. And it wasn't universally popular, and that's, you know, it's worth remembering that it was, you know, there were people who were less happy about it, but it was, you know, it was still a decision that we were prepared to make at that point. And, you know, I recognise that none of them are represented here, and, you know, part of our job as a council is to represent both the businesses and kind of communities who are impacted in different ways. And you know, obviously we weight it much more towards the kind of, you know, people with disabilities, and making sure that they're not negatively impacted. But it is worth just noting that you know, businesses felt it might have an impact on them, and, you know, perhaps maybe even for Place Board, it's probably, you know, something that's worth looking at again and seeing what perceived impacts there is, particularly as everyone will remember the kind of impacts that we've had on, you know, when we changed the rules on parking. You know, people do end up feeling very strongly about these things. You know, having said that, I still think it's the right decision. You know, I thought it was the right decision when it was just my ward, and, you know, now we're looking at expanding it. You know, I still think it's the right way to weight these things, because I think these are the decisions that you take as a council.
And thank you. Right, Councillor Megan Swift, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a real difficult one for everybody, because nobody wants to see people who can't see bumping into things and one thing or another. And before anybody tells me I don't know anything about people with blindness, my dad was blind for the last 15 years of his life. So, you know, there is an understanding there of, you know, what can go wrong. I'm also a little bit concerned that we're just throwing businesses out of the way on this. I think we need to have some sort of discussion that makes it safe for people who can't see properly, but doesn't take possibly the only advertising matter that certain business who was struggling like mad after the pandemic could, you know, there's got to be a way forward. I mean, it's like everybody else. It may take some finding and it may not come through the normal routes, but we have to do something. I mean, we're talking about the boards, but if you walk on from the town hall, you know, to, is it Honest Freddy's? He's got more things to sell on the pavement than he does in the shop, really. So, you know, what is one board compare with that? I want something that people are going to be able to understand. We won't have to then enforce it if people understand it properly. And I'd like us to go on from there.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Stephen Lee, welcome back. Clearly technical issues. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, what your role is, just for the members of the public who are here to this meeting.
Yep, Stephen Lee, Assistant Director, Strategic Infrastructure. I was primarily responsible for pulling the policy together. To answer some of the questions that were being asked just before I dropped out, unfortunately, we looked at a number of policies from other councils. 12 councils that we looked at within about a quarter of the whole of the highway authorities. About half of them had no defined policy. One no defined policy, which was extremely worrying, just said that we are very tolerant of airboards because we support businesses. And it was as simple as that. And that's one of the districts that isn't too far from us. Of the remaining authorities, 13 of them had policies that had measurements. So measured policies are indeed a feature, and the majority of those policies had a 1.8 minimum width. So basically, the 1.8 minimum width was based on a number of factors, not least of all the policies from other authorities. The question was asked about what had happened in areas where a total ban had taken place. In Bradford, there was a large kickback from the businesses in Salter especially. Bradford chose to pilot it in 4 completely different areas. So they had densely populated areas and more middle class areas, if you like, and they piloted it across an area of 4. Salter, as I said, came back. York introduced the policy within the city walls, and in Middlegate they. Although it's within the city walls, they do allow airboards, but only under license, simply because, as the head of engineering put it to me, the Middlegate businesses were a lot more organised than some of the other areas. So we've done we did the research in reaching this policy, and that's kind of the what it was based on.
Thank you, Stephen Lee, for explaining that. Councillor Evans, please.
Thank you, Chair. To a certain extent, there's beginning to be overlap, I think, now in terms of what people are contributing. Clearly, we do need a policy, and it's good to see it's happening. But I'm also very mindful of the issues which have been raised by the RNIB and people like that in relation to those with impaired vision and so on, the critical aspect of that. I think it's also interesting to note that a significant number of authorities near us have actually banned A-boards, people like Hull City, East Riding and so on. And as Stephen Lee was just saying, that clearly there are some people who are being more specific in terms of what we do in terms of what is allowed. I think the important thing as far as Calderdale is concerned is a bit like York. We have many narrow pavement areas, which is an issue in itself, and which in turn would determine the fact that it would be totally inappropriate perhaps to put A-boards there. And we need to think in terms of dimensions. 1.8 metres was suggested. In fact, when you look at what the City of Bath have done, they work on the same basis. They have diagrams. I've got little plans here showing people on there and the gaps which are allowed and not allowed and so on. So I think it's really important that we do home in on this, and I think it's important it goes back to Cabinet, and I think it's important that we develop the plan in more detail. I think one of the other issues which has come out as well is that it needs to be a more broad policy. We're not just talking about A-boards here. Again, I think, to be fair, Councillor Scullion mentioned things like alfresco cafes, other street furniture and so on. I think we should take the opportunity to include this in a whole policy which doesn't relate specifically to this issue of A-boards, which, after all, I have my business is a retail background one. There are other ways of advertising your business other than just A-boards. They can be positioned more effectively or on the premises themselves. So I think there is a need for a coordinated policy, and I do think we have a real need for a more widespread and coordinated consultation across the public, which has not been carried out to the extent which it should be. So I think the important thing is doing it, considering the possibilities of not having anything like A-boards, but certainly having a coordinated policy developed which takes all these issues into account, and one which is based on good coordinated consultation. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Durans.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this in detail. A couple of points. My concern with distances brings in many nuances. I think Councillor Hutchinson said pavements are not always in great repair. That means that the person with the need tends to be the one that has to adapt rather than the environment, and that will become very difficult to manage. As well as that, there's many different connotations depending on people gathering outside. I think everybody knows that I have physical challenges myself, and I can only offer that. I don't have sight difficulties. But when you're the person with needs, you tend to be the person that has to adapt at all points. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the policy in more depth. I think I had some challenges with the language. There was lots about not restricting access to bus stops, not restricting access to different areas. That was more for the wider public. Again, some of the furniture that's out on the street still restricts access to certain groups. And it felt a little bit exclusionary around those groups. But again, conversation's key, giving everybody the opportunity to build around. Again, I'll come up with the social model. I think the policies very much should be embedded with the social model. We should be increasing access for everybody and removing barriers wherever possible. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Durans. Councillor Foster, and thank you for substituting tonight.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to be able to contribute to this debate. I think it's an important one, and one where we really do need to pay attention to our environment in a way that maybe many of us don't do so in such detail on a normal basis. I think we do have a problem with A-boards. It's been mentioned in previous discussions over the years, and people have had various opinions on them. I think we need to look at, in a general way, about the amount of street furniture and clutter that we have on our pavements. A-boards are just part of the problem. You can walk down various streets and within 50 yards of each other, there'll be a bin, a signpost, another signpost, another signpost, something else in the way, a lamppost maybe. How much of this could actually be amalgamated, and could the relevant signs not be put on the lamppost, for example? I mean, I appreciate that it's being very general, and those each situation would have to be looked at under its own merits, but I'm sure that there is a large amount of amalgamation of street clutter, for want of a better word, that could be done. Equally, if we were going to ask businesses to no longer advertise with A boards, I think as a council we need to make sure that our own house is in order. Ensuring that, for example, diversion signs for roadworks are not left in the way, and are not left long after they should have been put away. That they should, there's more than one example where there's plenty of there's several weeks have gone by between after the roadworks have been completed and the signage is still there. It doesn't need to be. It needs to be, there must be some way of flagging where these things are when the works have taken place, and making sure that they're collected back up again in a timely manner. I appreciate lack of physical people to do that is likely to be an issue, but surely to goodness it could be incorporated somewhere. There's got to be a way of doing that. I'm sure Stephen Lee will have some comment, and I'd be very pleased to hear it. And finally, we need to work with businesses to establish alternatives. We need to make sure that we're not seen as the enemy, because we're not. We really want businesses to succeed in Calderdale. We can't do this without them. The businesses are vital for our towns and for our villages, and we really need to work with them to make sure that there are alternatives. So, for example, making sure that they can advertise hanging boards on their buildings without any penalty. There's got to be a number of different ways. I'm sure there are, and I'm sure people with better ideas about how to advertise businesses than I have will come up with some very inventive ways. But I think we need to make sure that we're working with businesses and not just against them, so we're not seen as the enemy, because that gets us nowhere, gets people's backs up. And we really do need to be all singing from the same hymn board, if you see what I mean. Finally, just very quickly, I was very pleased to hear Jane mention e-charging points. I've noticed some of those going into the pavement in Sorby Bridge, and I'm not entirely sure quite how helpful that is in the light of this discussion. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Councillor Foster. It's most useful comments from everyone. So, Councillor Robinson, first of all, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just be very brief because I can feel a recommendation in the air. But what I would say is these issues is quite clear, very difficult to please everyone. They really are. For example, I noticed when I read the papers that I know the various disability forums advocate a total ban. What will end up happening there, and I'm doing Cabinet's job here, but Cabinet will end up, say, advocating a total ban. That decision will then be called into place scrutiny meeting by businesses. That's what will end up happening. So it is important, I think, at this stage that there is an element of compromise within the decision. That's the key thing. And also, as I think Councillor Evans discussed and various other councillors, there's an importance of a consultation, a full consultation at this stage before something is implemented. And if necessary, this current decision can be used as the basis of the policy from which the consultation can be founded. So if we are making a recommendation tonight, I don't think we're quite in a position to recommend a course of action that the council should take. I think that's up to Cabinet, because I don't think we've got the evidence in front of us. But within the recommendation tonight, if we build in the fact that we believe Cabinet should conduct a full consultation both with businesses and all residents, not only individuals with disabilities, but also just general residents who just use the high street, everyone, in order to feed into the decision. And then hopefully we can avoid any call-ins in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. I'm now going to shout out house because actually all the members are now contributing. So I'm going to call in Councillor Benton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to obviously agree with what most people. I thought Councillor Foster raised a lot of good points, as did Councillor Robinson. Councillor Foster regarding road signage, I think we do see a lot of that, as well as obviously the other things mentioned, the A-board cap is out on the street, but also regarding the businesses, that we can't be seen as their enemy. And we need to go forward with this. And obviously, I think George raised a good point with the consultation, that as well as people that have difficulty, obviously, with the site, there's the pram users and other people, and the ordinary general public as well. I'm sure they could feed a lot into this. So that's all I wanted to contribute.
Excellent. All contributions welcome. Councillor Megan Swift. Still on mute at the moment. So in the meantime, Councillor Kingston, is that a historic hand, or do you want to come back in? Right, you're on speaker, Councillor Megan Swift.
Hang on.
Yeah, that's fine.
Not a historic hand. I do want to come back in.
I'll bring you back in after Councillor Swift in that case. My apologies.
Thank you, Chair. What I have to say won't keep you waiting a long time, Councillor Kingston. I'd like this to go further than we seem to be going. I mean, until I was ill earlier in the year and last year, I never, and it's not sad, I never realised how difficult getting round is, because, you know, there's somebody got a pile of boxes there and somebody done something else. I don't think this is just Calderdale. I think if you go into a lot of town centres, they're messy, really. But I don't want to be the enemy of the business, to use which I think it was not that used that phrase. We need to help businesses to recover from what's gone on. A lot of the mess in places is because while people couldn't go inside, I believe we gave licenses or agreement to an awful lot of shops, cafes and things to have table and chairs there. Well, it's lovely in summer. I'm not sure, you know, over the next few months, it's going to be great. But I'm having difficulty seeing a way forward, and a way forward that includes everyone. You know, yeah, anybody wants any suggestions, I can give them, but not at the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. I'm sure we'll work together, and as I say, we're more than happy to work with Cabinet. Right, I've got Councillor Kingston and then Councillor Durans.
I just wanted to raise the possibility that we're making some negative assumptions about business. That there's actually quite probably a business case for a total ban on A-boards. It's worth looking into that. Lots of businesses have, I speak as a business owner, our relationship with our customers is really important to us. And this affects our relationship with our customers, that there will be many customers that will be grateful if we cooperated with a total ban and actually supported a total ban. And you may well find that there are businesses that are in favour of a total ban, because it removes the element of competition. If nobody else is allowed an advertising board as well as my own business, then I've not got competition from other people that gives them an advantage. So that's worth considering. And then in supporting a total ban, I have the value added of my disabled customers and my customers who are people with wheelchairs, with push chairs or a wheelchair dependent. I've been wheelchair dependent, so I have experience of the frustration of access obstructions. We've got to consider businesses might well be in favour of this. I think we're assuming that they will oppose it and that we're actually acting against them by introducing a blanket ban if we do go down that road. That's an assumption that needs questioning, I think, is my suggestion.
Thank you, Councillor King. So I think it is something that does involve a bit of communication, I think, and getting feedback is all way round. Councillor Durans.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to separate some of what people have made comments about, and very relevant comments, but looking at some of our infrastructure in Halifax, we need to consider that reasonable adjustments can be made to businesses in order to offer access for people, depending what those needs are. Some of the older buildings, a reasonable adjustment isn't deemed necessary to put step-free access in. So some of the cafes that have come out onto the streets have actually improved access for some people and improved choice rather than limiting where they go. I do understand it's not an easy situation to manage because it depends again on distances and things. But I think when you're looking at where there is another option or it enables people to access somewhere, I think that needs to be considered as a separate entity, really. That's all I was wanting to add. Really good points that everybody's made, but I'm just thinking for some people having them tables outside has probably given people more choices because of their challenging needs and access needs.
Thank you, Councillor Durans. I think members will realise where we're going, where we're heading with this. So probably open it up to some of the user groups with any additional suggestions, and I'm sure that actually the Cabinet will be more than happy to work alongside with you with a revised particular policy, which I think is a way forward. So is there anyone from a user group that has a passion? Yes, Pete Howard, thank you for joining us, Pete.
Hello. Yeah, I just want to say at the start, I mean, I'm not going to say half of what I was going to say because I've been listening to the detail and substance of what you've been saying, but I just wanted to say at the start that there is presently a blanket ban on placing A-boards in the road, isn't there? I do say that again, there is a blanket ban on placing A-boards in the road, right, where the cars go. The reason why I say that is because there's obviously different values in play when you look at what can be done with an A-board, but it's legitimate to block the highway in one instance, but not legitimate in another. And that's a point of principle. I'll get onto the actual issues briefly, but I do recognise that there were a lot of shortcomings in the paper, the policy and both the paper, and I think some of those have already been discussed, but one of the most important things I want to talk about is what makes a good policy. Involve the stakeholders. We know who the stakeholders are. Some of them are here, others haven't been able to make it, others would be involved. And that is the affected groups and of course the businesses involved. Have a means of measuring the success of something is really important. And the policy that was put forward at the time didn't. And that was just going to lead to a mess in the future, in my view. The other thing really is that in developing a policy, it's really important to be mindful of the law of unintended consequences. And at this stage, it was one of these where if it only achieves just one thing, that's okay. But if it achieves alienation and acrimony, then that's no use either. But on the positive side, the council have the 2024 in mind, the vision for 2024, the one of inclusivity, and they've actually been moving towards an age-friendly locality. I think in parallel to that, there's nothing to stop Calderdale aiming to be a clutter-free Calderdale. You know, it's not just about developing the policy, it's also about working with the stakeholders and working with the community organizations, but developing, and this is really important, developing positive messaging, right? Because I don't think that that having an aging well approach is anything to be ashamed of. It's something to be civically really proud of, that the council and traders can get together, and street ambassadors and all of that to work together to make it so that people can just live their lives without having nuisance obstacles in their way. And yes, nuisance obstacles can be A-boards, and there is a little bit of symbolism about the A-board. What does that mean when in fact there are so many other carelessly considered obstructions on the street? So yes, I think thinking about what is clutter, what is a straight line, what's the importance of a straight line is really important. But I think, yes, a positive information campaign along the lines of encouraging inclusivity, compromise, yes. Thinking about some basic practicalities, like you're going to do something, put the things up, put anything like poles and stuff in a straight row. It's not rocket science, you know. But ultimately, the thing really is about, yes, talk to people, but I think if we'd gone down the road of a partial ban now, it would have probably led to a mess and an acrimony. I hope it can be reviewed. I do hope it can be sort of worked upon so that it's properly understood why A-boards are the past and not the future. If we're working towards 2024, there's a lot of time to work on that and a lot of time for positive messaging to be got out there, because when it comes to enforcement, there aren't the resources to enforce in the same way that there used to be, but there do also need to be hearts and minds with that change. So that's all I really have to say, rather than completely gunning for it, because I think that it's recognised that I think the policy was flawed.
Thank you, Pete. I think you'll see from the feeling tonight there's a strength of working together for the benefit of our community that we actually serve. So it's a wonderful example and of working together. So Maksud, would you like to speak on this? Then I've got June, and then we'll want to draw it to some form of conclusion fairly shortly, but I'm more than happy to listen to Maksud and June.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to introduce myself, I'm Maksud Sheikh, and I'm the Regional Campaigns Officer for the Royal National Institute of Blind People, which is the RNIB. And thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I just wanted, so many points have been made and all of them have been really good points. Everything that I would have said in favour of a zero tolerance policy towards A-boards has been covered. So I won't really go over all that sort of stuff. I just wanted to sort of share some stuff with you. So the RNIB did something called a Who Put That There report in 2015. And that actually, we surveyed over 500 blind and partially sighted people. 95% of those said that they collided with an obstacle. 49%, so half of those were with A-boards. A third of those that did collide with obstacles sustained injuries. They didn't report them, but they did sustain injuries. So that's a little bit of data for people to sort of see that the A-boards are genuinely a problem out there, even though they're not necessarily reported through data, that they are a problem. Also, on the health and safety sort of issue, and I know we've talked there's been a focus on blind and partially sighted people, and the nature of what we do is specifically around blind and partially sighted people, but it does affect a load of people, you know, whether it's people with other disabilities, mobility issues, perhaps, but pensioners. And an example of that is in 2017 in Bingley, a pensioner was tragically killed in Bingley outside of Wetherspoons. And now that was because it's not clear from the CCTV footage whether the A-board flew into the pensioner or the pensioner flew into the A-board, because it was quite windy that day. But either way, it did end tragically, and that was a pensioner. So it does affect other people. So that's just some some examples. What I wanted to say around Bradford, Leeds, York and Hull, some of the places I've worked on most of these on the Yorkshire and Humber authorities. In Bradford, there was a backlash from businesses from Saltaire, but it was very, very minimal. It was maybe 2 or 3 businesses. As part of the trial, we did ask what the impact was for the businesses over the 12-month period, and there was no response from businesses on that. So there was no data showing there was a problem with the A boards, and we've carried out our own sort of research around that, and we've not really found any evidence to show that there is a negative impact on businesses through data. Some people have mentioned alternative forms of advertising. In Ilkley, I know the Business Improvement District are currently looking at a very innovative digital sort of approach to advertising, which and we found that in York as well, that the Business Improvement District there did want to look at alternatives. So as one councillor I think quite correctly mentioned, maybe there's a few assumptions about businesses. You'll always get 1 or 2, 3, 4 businesses who won't like the idea because it's something that's unknown to them. But generally, when you look at that as a proportion of the total businesses, we've not really seen that big a backlash anywhere. The other thing I would say is that, the pandemic has hit the businesses, and nobody's an enemy of the businesses. We want to support them as much as anybody else. In fact, I think if their streets are accessible and blind and partially sighted people and people with disabilities and lots of other people who could access the streets, that would increase trade because they'd have more people going to those businesses. So there are just some points that I just wanted to make that I think were useful making. In Micklegate in York, the pavement was 1.8 meters, and that's the main reason that they allowed A boards on there, but they still had some restrictions there. Just a final point, I completely agree with this. So many people have raised the issue of other obstacles on the streets, and it's not just A boards, and that's true. It does need looking at. Again, the RNIB have produced something called a street charter toolkit, which I think would be very useful for the council and stakeholder groups to look at. We support the groups who have gone, who are supporting the zero tolerance ban. We would say a clear policy is needed, consultation with stakeholders in terms of not only disabled people and blind and partially sighted people, but we do definitely need to work with businesses as well. That dialogue definitely needs to take place with all stakeholders, and the street charter is definitely worth looking at. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight.
No, absolute pleasure. We'll take all those things on board, and I think this is the aim. That actually we'll anything that you want to feed in, we'll listen to. So we've got a few other members of the public wanting to speak. So if we can make it fairly and be even to the point, because I think we've sort of grasped what we really need to do. I think on this one, but we really do want to hear from you. So I've got June, Anne-Marie, and Val. You did put your hand up, but you may not wish to. You've no longer got your hand up. So I'll take June first of all, and then I'll take Anne-Marie, and then Val if she still wishes to speak. So June first of all, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief, but I do have a statement from Jill Shaw to read out as well as my own, if that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
I'll read first a statement from Jill Shaw of Hebden Bridge. My 13-year-old daughter is a typical teen, moody and mouthy and prone to dramas and the wearing of ridiculous fashions. What is not immediately apparent is that Libby is legally blind. She lost the majority of her sight unexpectedly and suddenly just 2 years ago, so she has had to relearn how to navigate her way around her world. Libby has no guide dog or mobility cane or other aid which alerts people to the extent of her disability. The onset of the pandemic severely curtailed Libby's independence. It's tricky to follow social distancing rules and maintain a 2-metre gap when you can only see a few centimetres in front of you. She was delighted when restrictions were lifted and our town of Hebden Bridge opened up. but in May last year, Libby collided with an illegal pavement obstruction at head height. The physical injuries she sustained were only superficial, but the mental scars run much deeper, particularly as the incident was witnessed by adults who laughed at her misfortune, perhaps unaware that they were witnessing the humiliation of a child with a severe disability. Libby now confines herself to home unless I am there to guide her around the proliferation of A-boards and other pavement clutter in the centre of our town. The temporary and mobile nature of these boards means that Libby struggles to learn and memorise where they are, so her legs get bruised from walking into them. As a parent, it is my experience that the overuse of A-boards restricts my child's freedom and opportunity to participate in her local community. That's the end of Jill's statement. And now I would like to say something on behalf of Hebden Bridge Disability Access Forum. So this is for me, June Eaton, on behalf of Hebden Bridge Disability Access Forum. We have been campaigning for a total ban on A-boards for 2.5 years, with detailed letters of evidence previously sent to Calderdale Council. A-boards clutter our pavements and are dangerous barriers to all pedestrians, but particularly to people with impaired mobility or vision or with pushchairs. There are around 40,000 disabled residents in Calderdale, with many thousands of disabled visitors and disabled tourists. Exclusion of these people from our streets deprives traders of the massive spending power of UK disabled households, known as the Purple Pound, which was estimated at £274 billion in 2020, and that is billion with a B, not million with an M. Imagine if we had in Calderdale houses, transport and pavements where Black and minority ethnic people were excluded, not allowed, or where women or LGBTQ plus people were excluded. That kind of discrimination is unthinkable. But these exclusions are a daily reality for many disabled people due to access barriers. It is not okay to exclude disabled people. Equal access is our right too under the Equality Act 2010. The A-boards policy approved by Cabinet would have brought some limited improvements in Hebden Bridge, but it would leave many no-go areas untouched. We support our disabled community across Calderdale in demanding a total ban throughout the borough. Calderdale's A-boards policy must be about fully reclaiming all of our streets for all disabled people, and it must be enacted speedily and robustly enforced. I also have a couple of very brief statements from.
If they are quite brief, because I think quite a number of the points have been heard, and we've got quite a few other people wanting to speak equally. But we do take those on board. You know, whatever you've got to offer us, we want to take those on board.
Okay, I just have from several wheelchair users. A-boards became the bane of my life. I have stopped going into town, which has a negative impact on the local economy and my social life. And another person whose brother uses a rollator that is 64 centimetres wide. The A-boards in Hebden Bridge causing significant difficulty and danger, unable to stand or walk without his rollator, and the A-boards at times force him onto cobbles. Again, he's excluded from going into town. And I'll finish there, except to answer what Councillor Scullion asked, you know, what do we want? We want a total ban, all Calderdale, full enforcement and immediate, but maybe that, and then consider the other pavement clutter afterwards, rather than delay getting rid of A-boards, which is much easier done as they are mobile obstacles.
June, thank you for your contribution. That's extremely useful, as all the contribution is. And Marie, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just like to make some points. Basically, I am registered severely sighted. I'm also now lacking in mobility, and I'm either in a wheelchair or, if it's a short distance, in a walker. Just on a personal note, when I did have more sight and I could go into the local town of Brighouse, A-boards and other obstructions on the pavement cause a lot of problems. you can, I've bumped into them before now, and it's the same with other things that are on the pavement. And especially when an A-board goes over and it clatters and everybody looks around, the embarrassment, and you get the comments of, couldn't you see that? Well, no, I can't, you know, and I shouldn't have to put up with that. As regards all these, just, you know, I think as the previous person said, if it was your creed or your colour or your sexuality that stopped you from going on that pavement, that would not be allowed. So the fact that I'm disabled, why does that have to have a pilot? Why does that have to say, yes, it's acceptable for A-boards? It shouldn't be. There's a Disability Act and I should be included, and I am not. I am totally excluded. In fact, since COVID, and as I say, the tables and the chairs and the A-boards and the parking on the pavement, etc., I am now a prisoner in my own home unless somebody can take me out. And I wish somebody at the council could tell me how that is inclusive and how that is fair, because it isn't at all.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Well, I think these points are being taken on board. I know I can see Councillor Scullin taking various umpteen notes, and I say you are being listened to. The fact that there is cross-party communication on this thing itself is a value in itself. So Val, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, to be honest, a lot of what I wanted to say has already been said, but I am a habilitation specialist and I work with children and young people aged 0 to 25. My work a lot of the time involves transition. It involves transition either from the home to school or in some instances to the workplace. And we have on regular occasions come across lots of clutter on the pavements. A-boards are just, as has already been said, one of the obstacles that we come across. And so my role is to teach the children how to navigate that and to get round safely and to stay safe, not to, as has happened just on Friday there with one child on Rochdale Road who wanted to step out onto the road to go round the A-board using her cane. You know, we work together and work with the children so that the future hopefully will become independent adults in the way that we all take for granted the independence which we have. And I think actually, you know, in some instances, if you have been faced with any disability, or you have understanding, in other words, that you personally or somebody in your family, then there's a greater understanding in some instances of that. It's not always the case, but when I'm working with the children, one of the issues that they have is that they can't do the same as their peers. They cannot negotiate the pavements independently. They have to be taught to do that. And so for me, a total ban on A-boards is what I would definitely be supporting in that respect. And I understand, I worked in business. I worked for 20 years in business as well. And so I understand from a business perspective, but there are many things that can actually be done from a business perspective to support businesses. If we want these children to be supported and be included in society, then I think it would be the way forward. So thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Val, for attending. And finally, I'm going to take Alison, and then we're going to go to a conclusion on this matter. So Alison, welcome to the meeting.
There's a lot of things I was going to say that have been raised. Apart from anything else, I think they've always been a problem, but they're now more of a problem because it's become more apparent because of social distancing. More and more people aren't watching where they're going because they're looking at the phone. The pavement clutter is increasing. The narrow pavements in Calderdale anyway, more and more of us are ending up in the road. I regularly have to go in the road. Or a mother with a buggy coming towards me, one of us will end up in the road to try and avoid all the clutter and keep a distance. It's becoming more apparent. It is a big problem that needs looking at urgently. And not just A-boards, as everybody has said, the clutter is becoming too much now and it's unsafe. The risk when you go in the road, it means it's a risk too much. And it needs looking at. That is my shortened version of what I was going to say.
We appreciate the shortened version, Alison, and thank you for that contribution equally. So I think I'm going to, I know Councillor Kingston, you have indicated to speak, but I think if we progress, because I think we're all heading in the same direction in relation to coming to a conclusion.
my hand is up to propose that we send this back to Cabinet.
Absolutely, which is exactly what I'm going to. So yeah,
are you going to propose it or shall I? Chair?
I'll propose it and you can second it. I think that might be a wonderful thing to do. Just before we do, Councillor Hutchinson, do you have anything else to add from anything that's been said? I'm sure very briefly.
Oh no, I think a lot of points have been covered. I do think that there's a better understanding of the issues at stake here, and I do hope that we can make progress on it as people have indicated they're willing to.
Indeed, yeah, no, super. So I'm going to recommend that it goes back to Cabinet. More than happy to work with Cabinet and the user groups as well. Well, I'm sure Councillor Scullion will nod ahead and hopefully agree with that. That might be the better conclusion to reach. And we do have a seconder, Councillor Kingston, who's willing to second that conclusion. But just before I do, I've got Mike Lodge, the Senior Scrutiny Officer, who may add a few points. You just on mute as well, Mike.
I'll be very brief. I just wondered whether members of the board might want to add to the recommendation that it's that the decision is referred back to Cabinet. I've just put a couple of points down that might help as it goes back through Cabinet. The second point is that the Scrutiny Board welcomes the willingness of Cabinet members to review this policy. Thirdly, the Scrutiny Board asks Cabinet to take account of the views expressed by board members and members of the public at this meeting. And fourthly, the Scrutiny Board thanks members of the public for their contributions to this discussion.
Absolutely perfect, spot on. I couldn't say it better myself. So with those recommendations on the table, I need members to show their hands in favour of that decision. So all in favour, can you put your hands up, physically put your hands up in front of the screen? And that's unanimous, I think. Yeah, it certainly is. Right, we'll two things. Very much welcome the opportunity to have had this discussion, extremely useful discussion. So thank you to Councillor Hutchinson, Councillor Barnes, who isn't here tonight, and myself who brought this to yourselves this evening. Members for your contribution, and equally members of the public. As we do listen to you, this is an example where actually we want to get it right, and we'll work with you to ensure that actually something comes good of this. So, Councillor Scullion, do you have anything to add on that? I'm sure you don't, but
yeah, just to say thank you to everybody.
Yeah, superb. So on that basis, that's a formally moved. So it's going back to Cabinet to review, and we have no other business on the agenda this evening. So I'm going to close the meeting and hope everyone enjoys the rest of the evening. And thank you for your attendance and valuable contributions. So thank you very much.